To prepare for this event and to get into the minds of the men wearing the uniforms, I thought this would be a really helpful video for you just to listen to maybe on your drive down or beforehand. But I read the 119th Pennsylvania Regimental History, rough and regular, over this past week, so I could share some unique tidbits and information with you, some things to think about as you're going to the event, and all that. So let's get started. Thinking about the man in the uniform himself, you could either imagine being one of the original volunteers who volunteered in August 1862, or you could imagine being a volunteer or a draftee in around, well, that same time, August 1863. So what we'll do is, depending on whichever you want to imagine, we're just going to go in chronological order of what these guys went through. So we'll start with the original guys who enlisted in 62. The Greys were a militia group in Philadelphia that was made up of a lot of the upper crust of Philadelphia, people like Elmaker, Henry Truefitt, John D. Mercer, William Wagner, Benjamin Saylor. These are your lawyers, your professionals. Just imagine like your dentist is in this unit. That's kind of how I imagine this. And when the war broke out, they began with creating a Philadelphia Home Guard. And all throughout 1861 and the beginning of 62, these guys would parade in the streets of Philadelphia, do some fundraiser drives for the boys over in Virginia, and, just be the Home Guard. In January 1862, they even ran a fundraiser to buy greatcoats for this little militia group. But then by, the defeats of the Union in the Peninsula Campaign, and with Lee moving north as the summer of 62 hits, a real sense of dread comes along this country, and these guys really think about, are we really helping? Are we helping our country just by doing these drives and marches in Philadelphia? There was a big rally held in Sampson Street Hall in July 29th, 1862, and all the members of this unit spoke and gave addresses and speeches and realized, you know what? This is it. We have to go and help our country. We need to form a regiment. Some people actually broke off from the Greys earlier and said, screw you, you're taking too much time, we have to go now. And many of these guys formed the 118th Pennsylvania, called the Corn Exchange Regiment. But our guys came a little bit later. Nonetheless, the call for recruitment was made in August 1862, and in order to reach the quota, Philadelphia, because remember, Lincoln called for volunteers, Philadelphia provided a $162 bounty for any man willing to join. So the types of people who went and enlisted in the 119th were either, patriotic people who wanted to save their country. Many of these Greys who were in the Elks Club equivalent of this militia, who are literally leaving children behind, like William Wagner, who is leaving 5 children behind. He becomes a captain. You also see some patriots like John Lawrence, who's not even from Philly. He's from South Carolina. John Lawrence's entire family is fighting for the Confederacy, but he actually goes and enlists and fights at First Bull Run, gets taken prisoner. This is before the 119th is created. He gets taken prisoner, and his Southern family basically writes to the Confederacy saying, oh, I'm sorry that, he's fighting against us. Could we just work out an exchange? And, he'll come to his senses. As soon as Lawrence is exchanged, he runs to Philadelphia, sees that the 119th is recruiting, and he joins them immediately. So he's kind of like a celebrity among Company C, and we know this guy. But also we have people joining for economic reasons. That $162 is quite a lot of money in 1862. And you have people who are joining the army, like the Faust brothers, who are who they don't have a father, and they have to watch and raise money for their mothers. So you have many people who are joining for either patriotic reasons or for economic reasons. Okay, so then the regiment is formed, and in August, all the month of August, we're marched to the outskirts of Philadelphia, 5 miles away, on the corner of 2nd Avenue and Fisher Lane, and we set up camp there. And we drill, and this is the first time many guys are sleeping out in the elements. And they are outfitted with all Philadelphia-made guns and equipment, so there's a lot of civic pride with this unit. And their first order on September 5th is to go to Washington, D.C. So they hop on the train, land in Baltimore, go to a refreshment center there, and then enter Washington, D.C. And this is their first order. Imagine, these guys have to defend the capital. Oh my goodness, our country is in real trouble. The rebels could come and take it. Their first impressions of Washington, D.C. was pretty poor. You could definitely see these guys had a lot of Philadelphia pride, because as soon as they came to Washington, soldier diaries wrote about how disgusting the city was. The refreshment center, called Washington's Retreat, had to mask the smell and odor of food scraps that were on the tables and floors that they didn't clean up with chloride lime. And these soldiers, many of them, wrote about how disgusting the city was. This is the first time many people are encountering contraband. Escaped enslaved peoples from Virginia and the South all gathering in camps in Washington. And then these guys are held up in an arsenal right near the Capitol building for about a week or so. Around the time of Antietam, the regiment is ordered to march to Maryland, just outside of the city, and they are ordered to build a fort called Camp Atkins. And these guys build this fort not really knowing how to do it. Remember, these are, upper crust Philly guys, or, maybe you're working class Philadelphians and need money. Nonetheless, these guys wrote in their diaries about how manly they felt when they built this fort in Maryland. It is also here where they discover the news of the Battle of Antietam. And thankfully they missed it. There's a lot of relief there for some of the people, maybe some who are anxious that they weren't there. But we hear some sad news. The 118th Pennsylvania, who's in the 5th Corps at this time, the Corn Exchange Regiment, was in the Antietam campaign. And many of these guys, many of us have friends there who were either in the Grays Militia or local friends and family. On September 20th, the 118th Pennsylvania was ordered to cross the Potomac River on a reconnaissance mission, and they got ambushed by Confederate soldiers and were literally getting shot in the back as they were trying to cross the Potomac River in a rout. We have over 280 casualties in the 118th, and many of the 119th guys are really angry. They're disturbed at the almost war crime nature of this war. For the first time, they hear many of their friends were killed in this way. And these guys haven't seen combat yet. But already, some of them have already lost loved ones in this engagement, and they are angry. At the end of September and the beginning of October, the 119th marches down to reconvene with the 6th Corps, and they march down to Northern Virginia. They pass South Mountain, and at Crampton's Gap, the 119th for the first time sees the carnage of a battlefield. Now, they walk over what was the battle near Crampton's Gap in South Mountain, and many of the soldiers in their diaries write on this long and arduous march. Some of them were 22 hours long. They're witnessing the corpses and many dead horses and the shallow graves of those killed being unearthed by the rain. And it was a pretty terrible sight for many of the guys in the 119th. Some of them actually made note of that. But they ended up with the 6th Corps and met with them in Virginia. Come late November and early December, we see the Battle of Fredericksburg, the first combat that the 119th will see. They witness at the area of Deep Run on the Rappahannock River, where the engineers are building the pontoon bridges. The 119th witnesses engineers getting shot at and killed by Confederate sharpshooters from the city of Fredericksburg. This is very likely the first time many of these 119th guys witness a man being killed in combat. They also witnessed the city being bombarded, and later that day, they end up crossing the pontoon bridges. The pontoon bridges were filled with playing cards and other discarded items and that's documented. Some of the guys actually wrote that, saying that, we don't want to be caught carrying playing cards on our corpse. These guys are posted right near the city, and they miss the Battle of Murray's Heights, but they could hear it. And other than some picket action, these guys really don't see much. There's one terrifying moment where the 119th is suddenly ordered to march forward and expect a Confederate counterattack. So this order came so quick that Colonel Elmaker, the colonel of our regiment, didn't have his horse. His horse was in the rear. So he ran forward, ran in front of the regiment, and ordered, "Fix bayonets. This is the first time that our regiment and our guys are expecting a combat situation, so there's a lot of anxiety, of course. The 119th marches forward, and they receive some artillery shelling. Some guys are hit in the wrist and legs with shells, but no casualties in terms of deaths. The 119th eventually withdraws over the river. The wagon trains don't come in time, so these guys don't have tents in the winter. They're very angry and upset. And winter camp begins in 1863 for them. For their first Christmas away from home, the 119th builds this beautiful camp. And I believe this photograph is of, it could be in that area, but they build these camps, and ironically, the Philadelphia Inquirer visited these camps, their hometown newspaper, and recorded that these guys built their tents, and it looked like Germantown, Pennsylvania, of how serene it was. And these guys even planted evergreen trees in front of their little huts. But it didn't last long, because Burnside ordered the Mud March on around January 20th, I believe, 1863. And Company A had a terrible time in this Mud March. As soon as it begins, it starts pouring rain, and these guys document cannons being almost fully sunken into the mud except the muzzle, where horse teams of 32 horses strong couldn't even pull the cannons out. These guys were stuck in traffic jams on the Long March, which is a soldier's most frustrating pet peeve in the Civil War. And it was so bad that Captain Ripka of Company A, our captain, was sent home due to exhaustion and will never come back to the Civil War. So just to show you how bad that was, our captain goes down in the Mud March, and we're called back to camp. The winter camp of 62 and 63 carries on, but the Mud March is just a reminder of that incompetence. The guys are really angry and upset. We lost our captain. We didn't see our first combat, and we're just being marched around in circles in the mud. But later on, the winter camp of 1863, like February 63, March and April, we see General Hooker take command of the army, and these guys get their morale raised again. They get their red crosses for the first time, and the red Greek cross, the symbol of our particular regiment and division, 1st Division, is something to be very proud of. These guys have a obsession with their corps badges and love to be a part of this. So many of the guys feel better. There's more drilling and more training, and feel a little more comfortable with the change in command. But that change in command will be challenged with the Battle of Chancellorsville, and in particular Salem Heights, which will be our very first combat. On April 30th, we are ordered as the 6th Corps to attack Fredericksburg as General Hooker takes most of the Army of the Potomac on a flanking action towards Chancellorsville. The 119th is chosen among the 5th Wisconsin and 6th Maine and the 49th Pennsylvania to do an amphibious assault at nighttime on the city of Fredericksburg. This made some of our boys a little nervous because remember what we just went through at Fredericksburg. All winter there were Confederates there. So we marched down, and at 4 in the morning, after some debacle and arguments with the Engineer Corps, who refused to carry us over at the correct time at 11 p.m. that night, we waited in the woods until 4 in the morning, anxious about crossing this river. We know there are guns there, and canister could easily wipe us off these boats, 45 men to a boat each. We hop on these boats. The engineers are splashing. The boats are crashing into each other, which is making us very anxious. The boys are very, very worried about making any noises so the Confederates could hear them. And the fog of the river is making it very difficult to see. They're just expecting a flash and hot lead flying towards them because they're vulnerable in these boats. But the boats land. The 119th crosses onto the Confederate side, and the rebels yell, the rebel pickets yell, Corporal of the Guard, run, the Union's here. We charge up without any order. The 119th breaks their line formation and just chases the picket up the muddy and slippery hill because it just rained. And the Confederates rallied out of their camp to fire a volley at the 119th, who was disorganized. running up this hill and slipping. In a moment, these boys feel like it's over. We're going to get killed. This volley is going to rip into us. Amazingly, they miss. The Confederates miss. Not a single guy's hit. So the 119th charges up this hill. The rebels retreat, and we're firing into the backs of the Confederate soldiers in a revenge move, I guess, of what happened to the 118th guys. That is our first real taste of combat, fighting Confederate infantry man to man, and the boys are very, very excited about this. They spend another day on picket duty, and the order is to attack Marie's Heights. Rebel guns are still on Marie's Heights, firing rounds at at the 6th Corps. So we are ordered to attack Marie's Heights. Now, remember, we heard the fighting at Marie's Heights before. We know how destructive that battle was. Back in December. It's May now. So it's kind of nerve-wracking, but the boys go anyway. And the 5th Wisconsin is in charge. They're in the lead. They're part of our little division here. They single-handedly take Marie's Heights. The 119th follows behind, and this is early in the morning, right? We capture the Confederate guns. So this day is going well, man. This campaign is going well. We chase the Confederates out of Fredericksburg. We take Marie's Heights, a ground that thousands of Union soldiers fought and died to take, but failed. And we even captured Washington's battery, an infamous Confederate artillery battery that was responsible for a lot of the carnage at Marie's Heights earlier. So there's a lot of joy being felt by our regiment, and the order is to continue marching down the Orange Plank Road. We march in column formation, and the musician of Company I starts playing patriotic songs, and we're actually singing along to it. As we're marching down this road on May 3rd, 1863, we encounter some Confederate pickets and some artillery, but, we're being drawn closer and closer into the fray. What's happening is our unit is heading towards Chancellorsville to assist Tucker. But we're just going in with this victory. But then by Salem's Church, the Confederacy on a wooded ridge makes their stand and directs all of their local units to take out the threat that we're posing. This is our first real engagement where we take many casualties. The 3rd New Jersey is leading the way. We are behind the 3rd New Jersey. And as the 3rd New Jersey attacks the wooded ridge, thinking that there's just pickets there, right? We're just going to do what we did before. We're going to go chase these pickets away. The 3rd New Jersey endures a massive, devastating volley from an entire regiment of Alabama soldiers, realizing with that gut feeling, this is it. They're waiting for us. This was a trap. The 3rd New Jersey rushes into those woods. We follow in right behind. And after a very, very confusing set of volleys we fired at the Confederate soldiers in the woods, we are chased out. And our regiment suffers 22 to 30% casualties in the chaos. Because as soon as we made it into those woods, the rebels just swarmed down that hill and took us out. The captain of Company B was killed, as well as many others trying to flee and run away. I cannot stress enough how close they were to destroying our regiment. And with our first combat scenario there, we witnessed many of our, friends and allies and people getting killed for the first time in large numbers due to volleys and independent fire and Confederate artillery. That very next day, we're posted over the same battlefield, expecting a rebel counterattack. Uncle John Sedgwick, the Corps commander of the 6th Corps, even says, this could be the annihilation. We're being surrounded by Confederates. We're brought into a trap. Thankfully, the battle was on the eastern flank of the battlefield. We were on the western, and the soldiers wrote in their diary that they witnessed a very interesting sight. They saw cows, a lost herd of cows from a nearby farm, just wander the battlefield, stepping on the wounded, stampeding. It was kind of horrific, but a strange sight nonetheless that many soldiers wrote in their diaries about. We withdrew the next day, made it all the way back to Fredericksburg, crossed the river, crossed the Rappahannock, and after 5 days back in camp, a truce was called because the Confederacy couldn't handle our wounded. There were so many wounded on the Confederate side alone. Think about it, it's Chancellorsville. a truce is called, and some guys in our regiment go out and help with the recovering of the wounded. We recover over 1,500 wounded Union soldiers who did not receive medical attention for 5 days. So now we're starting to get a little more hardened. We've seen maybe our friends get killed. We've seen what combat actually looks like in this war, and we're looking at the aftermath and seeing this, right? So that was the Battle of Salem Church, our first real engagement. Most of May and June 1863 were sent to a place called Aquia Creek, which is basically another camp that is more shady and has fresh water. We were moved there after our heavy fighting as a way to recuperate because we were pretty whipped after that. The camp was very hot. Many of us didn't really appreciate it, and a lot of boredom hit the camp. So we were asked to bring some volunteers to help Buford's cavalry contest what's the station? Brandy Station? Yeah, Brandy Station. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But there's rebel cavalry in the vicinity. Some of us send volunteers to go up the Rappahannock River, cross it, and engage. Ironically, very similar to what we're going to be doing this weekend. We encounter some dismounted cavalry along the river, fire some shots at them. There's no casualties, but we have to cross the river again to get back to camp. There's an interesting story that happens here, though. There are two ways to cross the river to the Rappahannock, back to camp. You either are able to cross the river in waist-deep water, or walk over a 90-foot railroad bridge. That's an estimation from Lieutenant Latta of Company B. He wrote in his diary a 90-foot railroad bridge that the boys had to cross over without any footpaths, so plank to plank. These guys in full kit had to walk over a 90-foot bridge. And the 119th was ordered to walk over that bridge. So in the diaries, one guy actually wrote that there was I think a New Jersey or a 6th Maine guy who was trying to go on all fours crossing that bridge because it was so terrifying. And an officer in the line was yelling at him, "Stand up like a man, walk over this bridge, proud and tall." He just broke away and went down and crossed the river with the cavalry. So that's a little interesting story. I don't know if any of you have fear of heights, but I definitely do, and that resonated with me. But as soon as we get back to camp at Aquia Creek, that's when the order is given, we have to march north. Lee is moving north for another invasion. So this march north is pretty taxing for us. Our first night of the march, in fact, we're marching through the woods to conceal our lines. And with the moon totally absent and under a canopy of dark, tall trees, so many of our guys actually get wounded by twisting their ankles, falling in ravines. We even have some records of guys falling under wagons or getting trampled by horses. So we are marching. We reconnect with the larger elements of the 6th Corps. And on July 1st, while the battle's happening, we are ordered to do a forced march of roughly 37 miles to the battlefield. It is a very, very long and taxing forced march. But we are marching along the Baltimore Turnpike, which is the equivalent of a major thruway of the time. It is limestone, and with all the wagons and people and whatever and animals marching on this road, the limestone is being pounded into a fine powder and dust that is kicking up with every movement of the troops. And this dust is getting in our lungs, and we're coughing, and it's horrible. But in the late night of July 1st, somebody started to sing John Brown's Body. And a band began to play it as we're marching. It's like 2 in the morning, on July 2nd, actually. And, all of a sudden, the whole 6th Corps starts singing this song. And it's one of those moments that you read about that's just, wow, these guys just got into that. It was a spontaneous show of that patriotism that some of these guys fought for and enlisted for. It could have been a way to also just keep your mind off of that horrible march. But then as we're getting closer and the dawn of July 2nd comes, we start seeing, as the 119th, survivors of the Battle of Gettysburg, particularly the 11th Corps, stragglers just walking away on the opposite way, going, the other way on this turnpike, telling us to turn around. These 11th Corps guys are saying, hey man, you're going to get chewed up. You're going the wrong way. So there's this gut feeling, something big's happening. You can even hear the battle in the distance. And as we're marching, we're hearing it getting louder and louder. All along the way, whenever a well or fresh water is seen, massive lines of people waiting to fill canteens are crowding these areas. So many of us are thirsty or can't even, find adequate water. One Pennsylvania woman and her daughters took fresh water and ladled it to soldiers as they were marching by. Again, in Lotta's diary of Company B, this woman argued that, hey, I have a son that's in another corps, and if I saw him here, I'd be doing the same thing. So I want to help you all. So that woman's generosity made its way into some of our diaries and in the regimental history. As we're getting closer, we see a refugee family just outside of the city or town of Gettysburg. And the teenage daughter of this family, who's carrying all of her belongings, whatever she could carry, looks at one of the brigadier orderlies of our brigade and says, "Give me a rifle. I want to go fight those rebels." We have it documented that that brigadier orderly said, "I want to marry this woman, as soon as I can if she's available." That kind of raised our spines, stiffened our backs. It's like, hey, this is it. This is the big engagement of the war. The 6th Corps is taken to the Union left flank towards the Round Tops, towards Big Round Top specifically, at a place called Rock Creek. This is a creek that many of our boys were excited to stop by because we had water. Many of them were able to soak their feet in the creek. And basically for the Battle of Gettysburg, we were there. 119th was at Big Round Top, did not really engage the enemy. On July 3rd, they heard the bombardment. And for the next couple days, we occupied that position, expecting a rebel counterattack, because they didn't have hindsight. The rebels could have tried again. When we pursued, the 6th Corps was ordered to pursue Robert E. Lee in his retreat back to Virginia. And on July 7th, the 119th walks over what would be the wheat field and the heavy fighting that occurred with sickles and all that in Longstreet. And these guys wrote in their diary of the horror of the dead and the dying left on the field. It rained quite heavily right after the battle, and many of these bloated bodies in the sun still haven't been buried. And it made its way in the diaries of some of these guys. Some of them even said, "I thought that I was hardened by what I saw at Salem Church, but I guess I'm not." The rest of the engagements that follow in July and August of 1863 involved the 119th going all throughout the mountains of Maryland and northern Virginia, chasing the Confederacy back. In fact, not too far from where the 119th will be for this weekend. There are a series of fortifications that the rebels build, a lot of anxiety as we're marching through these fortifications, expecting to attack them, when in reality, many times we come across these trenches and the rebels just left. There's one situation that happened that is notable in the diaries during this period. We see some soldiers write about Misery Mountain. Misery Mountain. I don't have the name. I think it's Canocton Mountain. But nonetheless, this was a very steep mountain that our regiment had to cross over in the rain, in the dark, with lightning. And there was a traffic jam up along this march, so we had to just sit and watch as, shoot, we have to climb that thing. And as we were climbing, some of the passes were so narrow that only one person could fit through. And they had to climb on all fours up rocks and boulders to get up this thing. It was so muddy and so dirty and miserable that multiple people wrote about this experience. They labeled the mountain Misery Mountain. And the next day, when they were able to get to, I think, Beaver Creek or a creek nearby, many of the men were able to wash the mud off themselves. And they couldn't even recognize each other. That's how much mud was on these people. So that campaign generally ends, and we are sent to a place called Warrenton, Virginia. It's an abandoned town, and we set up camp there for the rest of August. It is so hot in this town, and in August of 1863, that drill is canceled. They cancel drill. The order is stay cool. Some of the men go out and forage for blackberries in this time because blackberries are abundant in this area. But 2 people of Company A die of heat exhaustion. So this is just a horrible experience for us in the heat, and something that we definitely don't want to recreate in the future. It is also around this time that we see the new volunteers and draftees join the 119th. Okay? So as we're in Warrenton, we get a new wave of recruits coming in. And with that, I want to stop and do a part 2. I realize that this is a half hour long already, so I think this first half hour will be, hey, if you want to just learn the chronological history as someone who was here since the beginning, here you go. Part 2, I'll pick up right from this camp, summer camp we're at, Warrenton, Virginia, and get to our present moment for Early's Raid. Thank you.